morning, everyone here in Houston. Good afternoon in Europe. Hello to people tuning in from all over the world to this edition of Atlantic Council Front Page. Mr. President, this is our premier live platform for global leaders. I'm Fred Kemp. I'm President and CEO of the Atlantic Council. We've hosted some 75 Atlantic Council Front Page events since we launched the series, everyone from President Macron of France to Secretary of State of the United States to leaders, heads of state, heads of government from Africa, Latin America, all over the world. We've never done an Atlantic Council Front Page from Houston before, so this is a first. And of course, Mr. President, it's our first time with you. So before I introduce the President of the Czech Republic, Petr Pavel, I want to first and foremost extend our sincerest gratitude to our host, the Bay Area Houston Economic Partnership, have been amazing partners, for thanking us, letting us use this venue in the midst of the city's recovery efforts from Hurricane Beryl. Our sympathy goes out to those in Houston still recovering from what we now know is the earliest Category 5 storm on record. We have the honor, as I said, of hosting the President of the Czech Republic, Petr Pavel, for a discussion on the path forward for transatlantic collaboration and really whatever else comes up in our conversation. We're delighted to host this event immediately following the conclusion of the Washington NATO Summit, where we as co-hosts of the NATO Public Forum were also lucky enough to host the President. I also want to salute a couple of board members who are in the audience, Michael Margolis and Tyson Focal. It's always great. We have infiltrators all over the world, and we have them also here in Texas, so thank you so much for being here. It's in the spirit of celebrating U.S.-Czech relations, it's also fitting to do this from Texas, which is home to the largest Czech diaspora in the United States, so more than 200,000 people. They arrived heavily from 1850 to the beginning of World War I. One of the wonderful things about an opportunity like this is you get to read up on this. But of course, there was no Czechoslovakia at that time, and the President may tell us a little bit about how they helped that come about. So it was Slavic people from Bohemia, Moravia, Silesia. And what tied them together for all those years were their farms and their language. This week's NATO summit marks the 75th anniversary of the alliance, an important moment to reflect on the success of this historic partnership. Mr. President, we think of this as the fourth inflection point since World War I, period after World War I, period after World War II, period after the Cold War, and hopefully the period after the Ukraine war, where the U.S. working together with their partners and allies were decisive in those outcomes. Decisive in a negative sense after World War I, decisive in a positive sense after World War II. We're facing the greatest threat to the global system since the 1930s, and that was all the talk when we were in Washington. Your country, your area knows about this, having lost the Sudetenland in 1938. In the summer of 1938, when Western Europeans, particularly the British, felt that by giving this up, they would make a peace offering to Adolf Hitler. And some people are now likening the occupied territories of Ukraine to the Sudetenland of that time. We are honored to host you, Mr. President, to discuss our shared future and collective challenges. The Czech Republic is a country whose democratic ideals were repressed by the Soviet Union in 1968, as it was Czechoslovakia, and is today a member of the NATO alliance, a member of the EU. As one of those who lived through that period of time, it's almost miraculous to see 32 NATO allies gathering in Washington as they did. There are few leaders who are more capable to talk about these issues than President Pavel. I think it's fair to say there isn't another head of state of NATO who is a former Army general, former head of military intelligence, and also a former high official of NATO as well. And so he can give us a lot of insight in what we're going to be talking about. Before becoming the 4th president of the Czech Republic, President Pavel had a distinguished military career. He rose through the ranks to eventually carry out the role of Chief of the General Staff of the Czech Armed Forces. And then he continued as chair of the NATO Military Committee, the highest-ranking military officer inside NATO. And since leaving his position, President Pavel has cemented the Czech Republic's key role in the transatlantic community on issues also beyond defense. We've seen this through Putin's brutal invasion of Ukraine, through China's assertiveness into Indo-Pacific, through the Iran-backed conflict in the Middle East. Prague throughout has demonstrated remarkable leadership and resilience. We'll get into a conversation about this, but the Czech Republic has also shown determination providing the necessary military aid through joint production projects, a commendable and creative ammunition initiative, and more. The country is also one of the staunchest supporters of Taiwan. I've just returned from Taiwan myself, in the transatlantic community, taking a step forward by hosting conversations and visits between Czech and Taiwanese leaders. The NATO summit focused on China and the Indo-Pacific more than any NATO summit before. We'll talk about that as well. Before we turn to the President, I also briefly want to thank our friends at Jagiello 2000 for the partnership in this and for organizing the event, to the staff working here today to make this all possible, as well as the in-person and virtual audiences. And then finally, as I ask my first question of the President, remember to submit your questions. If you're online, I'll look for a hand in the room, but if you're online, submit your questions to askac.org, askac.org. So let's get started. I wonder if you can give us some reflections. You've just been at the NATO summit. I talked about the special perspective you have on this, and not all leaders can have. Can you give us your feeling of where you think it succeeded, where you think maybe you would have liked a little bit more, and what you think were its primary accomplishments, but also perhaps failings?
Well, okay. I think if you are to assess anything like success or failure, it depends on what kind of expectations do you have up front. We were expecting from that summit to celebrate the 75th anniversary of the alliance, but also we expected a number of working results with regard to Indo-Pacific, to Ukraine, to Russia. And all of that has been achieved. I was positively surprised by a response of most of the nations towards the Ukrainian needs. Committing not only financial resources but also equipment and including aircraft. I believe that even President Zelensky was assured that even though he didn't receive an invitation to the alliance, he got what he wanted. That means concrete support for the battlefield, as well as a number of bilateral agreements that will give him some predictability of planning for future potential crises.
Let's stick with Ukraine for just a moment. You're a military man. You probably understand better than anyone what that front line looks like and what Ukraine needs to do, not just to hold it, but also to push it back. Some of the agreements were military equipment. Some of the agreements was a new command to support Ukraine. Is it enough?
Well, enough would be an amount in quality and level of readiness that would allow Ukrainians to fully restore their territory, but it's not realistic at this time. We have to have in mind who is the opponent, and Russia definitely has much greater resources, all kinds of resources than Ukraine. With all our assistance, I believe that at this point, if Ukraine is ready to hold the territory, that will be a success. In the foreseeable future, we cannot expect any significant breakthrough on the front line. I also believe that what we should strive to achieve is to convince Russia as soon as possible that they cannot achieve any significant success on the battlefield, and that would bring them to the negotiating table. But to achieve that, we have to equip Ukraine with all they need to really hold the line, present a solid defense, and at the same time to inflict losses on Russian military. In parallel, we have to pursue all political and diplomatic effort to convince as many countries as possible that this conflict should be resolved in accordance with international law, especially the principles of UN Charter.
So no breakthrough in the foreseeable future. I would imagine that means either from the Russian side or the Ukrainian side. Over time, doesn't that favor Russia, because Russia does have more material, does have more people? So how do you see this unfolding 2025, 2026?
Well, if Ukraine withstands the pressure of Russia, and then Russia will not get any success, then, and of course, with regard to the result of American elections, we may expect some movements by the end of this year or beginning of next year. In the meantime, we should also do our best to convince China that it's not in their interest to be so closely aligned with Russia, and to create pressure also from Chinese side on Russia to negotiate. And then once the negotiation starts, obviously our position shouldn't be to legalize occupied territories as Russian, but rather declare them as temporarily occupied territories, which we will never recognize as Russian, but we understand that under current circumstances there is no realistic option how to get them back.
It's a very interesting approach, as we did with the Baltic states during the Soviet period. We'll come back to China. You also talked about U.S. elections. There's a debate in the United States about why Ukraine. And as you know, a lot of the support for Ukraine was held up for a long time in the Congress. Talking to Texans, talking to Americans, what are the stakes? Why does it matter? Why should Americans care about the freedom of far-off Ukraine?
Well, I would say, why should everyone take care about what's going on in Ukraine? Because it's not a war for Ukrainian territory, it's the war for principles. Russia thinks that they cannot achieve their long-term political objectives by military power. They disregard the international order, they disregard international law, they simply want to restore the greatness of the Soviet Union. And if we don't want not only Russia, but also many other countries who are watching from behind to believe that the rules are changing, that they cannot push their interests through aggression, then we simply have to resolve that conflict in favor of the principles. And this is the narrative that I am using whenever I talk to the leaders in Africa, Latin America, asking for their support. That it's not about if they like or dislike Ukraine. It's about if they like or dislike living in a world where rules matter. Because even the countries that are as distant from Ukraine as, for example, Colombia, may be interested in living in a world where they will be protected by some rules.
Yeah, I like that. I like that way of looking at it. It's not whether you like or dislike Ukraine. It's whether you want a world run rules. There was a lot of nervousness in Washington underneath, behind the scenes this week with 32 leaders of NATO. And a lot of it had to do with our own upcoming elections. You've said yourself, if Donald Trump gets elected, this is a quote, if he gets elected again, I don't think it will mean any disaster for Europe or Ukraine. I've had foreign leaders tell me before that they wished they could vote in our elections because so much in the world depends on who we elect and how the United States decides to exercise its global role. How are you looking at the elections? What were you hearing from your colleagues in Washington from other NATO countries?
Well, there's a lot of nervousness both within the United States and in other parts of the world, and naturally so, because the United States are naturally considered being a leader of the democratic world, and whenever we are in a crisis, we look to a leader to show the way and also to calm down the situation. Now, whenever we lack that leadership, there is a growing nervousness about the way ahead. Right now, it's quite clear that there is no global leading role in terms of decisive action in Ukraine. And that gives both Russia and China some hope that they can resolve it on their own terms. And I really believe that the summit that we have just ended up yesterday showed the way, because vast majority of the countries were united behind the view that we have to do all at our capacity to help Ukraine not to lose in this war. No one wants to defeat Russia, but we want Russia to fail in Ukraine. And that is important because otherwise Russia will be encouraged, China will be encouraged, and many other countries, including Iran and North Korea, will be encouraged in their understanding that the West, the democracies, are not as strong as they seem to be a short time ago.
Thank you for that answer. Let's talk a little bit more about China. The NATO declaration, which was mercifully short and pretty well written, had spent a lot of time, more time than ever before, on the issue of China, calling China the decisive enabler for the war in Ukraine, making pretty clear that if China weren't enabling, that war wouldn't go on. You had the Indo-Pacific Four there, so leaders of Japan, South Korea, and New Zealand and Australia. Some in America say, well, these are not linked. China's the bigger threat over time. We should be spending more time on that. Europe should be spending more time on Europe and Ukraine, and not seeing the interlinkages from all this. It seems like NATO saw the interlinkages this week, and I wonder how you look at the links and how one, particularly from a European standpoint, what one can do. Jens Stoltenberg, the head of NATO, said this can't be cost-free for China, but so far I don't see anyone really wanting to exact any costs from China.
You're right, and on the issue of interconnectedness, I think it is quite obvious that security in Euro-Atlantic area cannot be separated from security in Indo-Pacific and elsewhere. Because, for example, if there is any conflict in South China Sea, the whole Europe will be very quickly affected by a lack of goods, because about 50 up to 60% of global trade flows through this area. So we have to be concerned about security in Indo-Pacific. And the same way, Indo-Pacific partners, and not only these four, that means Australia, New Zealand, South Korea and Japan, but many other countries will be concerned in security in Euro-Atlantic area, because Russian victory in that war would bolden China and make it more assertive. That would have a direct impact on them. So I think we all understand that we are together in this global security environment, and that we have to show solidarity with each other, and especially with those countries with whom we share the values, the strategic objectives, and approach to a number of existing problems. Naturally, so we have to cooperate, and that's why we came to a very good common language with the IP4, but also with a number of other partners that NATO has around the world.
And could you talk about your own approach to Taiwan and why you've approached Taiwan somewhat differently than other European leaders?
Well, we have our own one China policy. We respect that there is one territory but two systems. We have a long-term relationship with Taiwan, economic, political, diplomatic, cultural, and we want to preserve them because we see them useful, and we in no way interfere with the issue of Chinese sovereignty. And that's why we also will pursue our own approach, and we will not withdraw from our cooperation with Taiwan because China doesn't like it.
But it seems to me that, as Stoltenberg said, one has to impose a cost, but there's some very deep economic ties from Europe to China as well, and thus far, China is able to supply, I think, 90% of the microelectronics, really what's needed in the military equipment. What could European countries do? What could the U.S. do to get China to change its approach to Ukraine?
China is without any doubt a global actor, and with a number of parameters that make it superpower. But at the same time, it's a country that lives in a world that is linked with offer and demand, and they are to a large extent dependent on the West and on the democratic world. But the problem on our side is that we don't have a common policy towards China. And the very fact that they can use the old Roman divide et impera means that they are clearly putting wedges among ourselves and using it for their own benefit. If we are able to come to the same language when it comes to trade policies vis-à-vis China, including some restrictions, then I think China would quickly realize that we have to come closer to each other and find common language.
Thank you for that. Talk about the really unique role that the Czech Republic has played in respect to Ukraine and ammunition and weaponry, where you've really hit above your weight on that respect, and particularly I think something like 800,000 rounds of 155 millimeter, which is what is most needed on the front right now, which you gathered and helped bring about, again, going back to your unique background and what you can bring to it. And then on the other hand, bringing in, I think, more than 300,000, so 340, 350,000 refugees at the same time. Talk about how your country is looking about this, how you're looking about this, and how you decided to do this, and how did you bring all this about?
I would say, with regard to my previous experience, that Czech Republic used to some extent a special forces approach. That means act first, ask questions later. And as we were not in a position to give Ukraine what they needed from our own stocks, because our stocks were limited, we were trying to find a way how to overcome that deficiency. And we realized that there is quite abundant stocks all around the world. and that we can get that equipment, but we needed funding for it. So we addressed a number of countries to help us with this issue. So we developed the procedure. We got in touch with countries willing to provide financial resources. At first place, it was Denmark, Netherlands, Canada, and later other countries joined. And through that cooperation, we were able to provide Ukraine much more ammunition and equipment. And then when there was a big shortage of ammunition, especially artillery ammunition, and the European Union first promised 1 million rounds by March this year, and this promise was not fulfilled. We realized that the time has come to really move forward. And I promoted that initiative in February this year at the Munich Security Conference, and it got a lot of traction among participant countries. So immediately we started receiving offers from a number of countries that were willing to join. And right now the situation is that we have financial cover for about 500,000 rounds. We have delivered to Ukraine first 50,000 in June. In July and August, it will be similar numbers, so 50,000 every month. And since September till the end of the year, we will deliver every month between 80 to 100,000 rounds. It will fully cover Ukrainian need and even create some stock. But it's not at the end. We're working with the allies and partners to continue and also expand that initiative from ammunition only to artillery pieces, new barrels, but also any other equipment that Ukraine might need. And it's a complementary activity to many other activities ongoing within the alliance.
Yeah, I think people focus so much on NATO. These 20 bilateral agreements of countries with NATO this last week were also hugely important. Let me go to a question from the audience. I'll also look around the audience here, but we've got from online, Moritz Ludwig. Given the relative instability of the German and French political systems currently, do you think that middle countries, especially those in Central and Eastern Europe, will have a greater role in the EU and NATO? And people have been talking about whether particularly with the importance of Poland as well, whether the center of gravity in Europe is moving eastward.
I think we should probably stay away from dividing countries into big and small, but rather looking at them, what is their capacity in many other ways. If you look at Europe, to countries like Denmark, Norway, Finland, Sweden, they are relatively small, but they are big in their initiatives, their ideas, their approach. I think they are in many ways an inspiration. So it's not about feeling small, but rather being self-confident. If one believes that his idea is right, then they should promote it, and that's what these countries are doing, and that's why they have the influence that exceeds their size.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. A number of different questions from Laurel Atkinson, but I think they focus particularly on should one be doing more, particularly as the Czech Republic, to be a bridge between the West and Russia, and could one not make progress as Russia welcomes multilateralism and multipolarity within the international community? What steps can the Czech Republic take to help bridge the divide between the West and Russia, and indeed progress toward a diplomatic resolve of the Ukraine war? How would you like to address that?
Personally, I'm a little bit sensitive to the word bridge because it's being overused. In our own experience, my predecessor wanted to present Czechia as a bridge between the West and the East, but it doesn't work. Now we had a big debate about NATO declaration vis-à-vis Ukraine, and its future membership. And again, the word bridge was pushed into the declaration. In fact, bridge can be easily destroyed, and but I believe that there are many other ways how to facilitate the dialogue between East and West, but not necessarily through one specific country. I don't think that Czechia or any other country is in a position to really become a bridge. Not even Hungary will not be a bridge.
Yeah.
So, but at the same time, I wouldn't close doors because we have to try to communicate. Actually, when I was in a position of chairman of NATO Military Committee, it was right after the annexation of Crimea, and I put a great effort into restoring communication with the Russian military. And it took me almost 2 years to organize a meeting with General Gerasimov. And it happened on, for them, neutral soil because they were already under sanction regime. So we met in Baku. And I believe it was a productive meeting, but there was no follow-on. So we shouldn't close the doors, but let's use other official channels than picking up one country that would fill the role of a bridge.
Well, let's stick with the bridge metaphor, and NATO's been talking about, and it's in the documents, building a bridge toward NATO for Ukraine. Some of the most interesting language was calling China a decisive enabler for the war. One of the words that was negotiated a lot was an irreversible path for Ukraine to NATO, but irreversible can be 25 years from now, it can be 2 years from now. Many of the allies believe that we're being too cautious in our approach toward bringing, inviting Ukraine into NATO as a member. Where do you stand on that issue?
Well, first, from a purely technical and military point of view, Ukraine has the most experienced military in Europe at this point. It's also the biggest military in Europe. They have a lot of experience based on last 2.5 years that can be and is being used by NATO allies. The level of cooperation, interoperability is as big that actually there is now no obstacle for Ukrainian military to work seamlessly with NATO in a number of areas. What obviously is an obstacle is the ongoing war. I believe that leaving Ukraine in a shadow zone would only create a condition for new conflict. So if we want to have an eastern flank stable, we should really think forward and bring Ukraine closer to us and facilitating their integration into NATO. Ukrainians demonstrated tremendous determination and courage, despite all the difficulties they are facing, with all the delays and hesitation on our side with regard to their support. We told them from the beginning, you are not alone in that. But actually they are, to a large extent, alone, because we are providing them with material support, financial support, and services, intel, but we cannot provide them with people. They are dying day by day. So for all of that, I believe that they truly deserve to live in a decent and free country. And we can do a lot about it. And I believe it's a moral obligation to do it.
So a faster path to membership?
Well, not necessarily faster, but I would follow the same path. That means let's go through all the phases of technical preparation, meeting all the conditions, criteria. That's fair. But at the same time, let's be very clear, and I believe that this summit was clear, because if we use the word irreversible, that means that we are heading that path. But once we have a ceasefire, once we start negotiating peace, then we should also in parallel proceed with the integration.
So I don't quite know how we're doing questions in the room, but I see a question here that I'd like to take. Is there a microphone? There we go. Randy Bell.
Thank you so much. Following the NATO summit this week, I noticed that energy security was not at the top of the agenda, which seems like a positive thing. But since we're in Houston, the energy capital, I thought it would ask, do we think we've largely solved the energy security challenge for Europe right now, or do we need to remain vigilant as this conflict is ongoing?
Good question. I think it might be interesting also to hear how the Czech Republic has dealt with its own energy issues. Yep.
Okay, I will speak about Czech Republic. 2 years ago, I'll say before the aggression, we were largely dependent on Russian gas and oil. When it comes to gas, we are now at zero dependence on Russian gas. We assured the deliveries through Germany, through terminals in Netherlands and Germany from different sources, including the United States. As for the oil, we're still dependent about by 50% on Russian deliveries, but this situation will end by the end of this year, latest beginning of next year, when the facility will be ready to increase capacity of TAL Plus pipeline from Italy with the terminal in Trieste, and then we will ensure also deliveries of oil from non-Russian sources. We are working with our partners, including in the United States, on long-term contracts, especially for oil and LNG, so that we'll be totally independent on Russian energy. And with regard to European security, energy security, I think there is still room for more coordination, because we're still working pretty much country by country instead of looking at it with a bigger perspective, not only from European point of view, but also working with the United States on how we can ensure energy security for the democratic world rather than for individual countries.
And Randy was the senior director of our Global Energy Center before going into the private sector, so we've followed this enormously closely, and I think everybody was pretty impressed by how quickly Europe actually adjusted to coming off of Russian energy, which everyone, since energy had been so well weaponized, it really felt like it was going to be harder than it turned out being. Looking out to the audience again, I've got a question here from a fellow by the name of Anonymous, and the question is really about the European Union. You've been vocal about Europe reducing military reliance on the U.S., crucial ahead of the election, but not only just because of that. And the question really is, how does the European Union do this? There's some talk now about a defense industry commissioner. Would one have to come up with debt instruments? What would one have to change in terms of the economy in order to come up with the defense budgets that one needs for this period of time? So just as you're also a member of the European Union, how would that work? And what would ensure European security regardless of U.S. commitment?
Well, I don't want to be too sarcastic, but I would say European Union loves the word autonomous, autonomous in defense, autonomous in economy, energy, and so on. But whenever Europe gets into trouble, we look over the ocean. And how can we talk about European autonomous defense when our defense spending was halved within the last 2 decades? We saw the calls from the United States to European allies for fair burden sharing for years. But when they were presented by President Bush and then President Obama in a very polite way, they were not strong enough to move European allies to realize that we have to take our share. of responsibility. It needed a very irresistible way of presenting facts by Donald Trump to convince European allies that time has come to do more. And then, of course, war in Ukraine. And right now, many European allies are doing much more in terms of ensuring our own defense, but still there is a lot of work ahead. With regard to European autonomy, I never saw it as something aimed against the United States, but rather along with. United States would need an equal partner in Europe, not a dependent child. And that's why I think if we are able to reinforce a European pillar of NATO, to eventually be able to function independently, and leaving the option for the United States to either participate or not, that would be a European autonomy in practical terms. All other ideas, such as creating EU army or to provide European Union with the core function of collective defense, it doesn't make sense, because we would only duplicate what already exists. So let's work with what we have, and let's fill all the capability gaps that we have in our forces and capabilities, also in not only in combat units, but especially in enablers, because this is a grave limitation of European militaries. And then we can be a true partner.
But it sounds like you're not a big fan of the whole notion of strategic autonomy as a concept.
Well, I like it as a sign of self-confidence, but not being autonomous from United States, but being complementary to United States.
I like that. That's a nice way of putting it. A question on Russia. Everyone's concerned with the war in Ukraine. However, Russia is having a direct and dangerous impact on our societies aside from the war through its espionage, disinformation campaigns, and more. We saw the assassination plot on the Rheinmetall's CEO that came out yesterday. How do you characterize the threat? Perhaps even how do you feel it in your own country? And how can we defend democracy against these non-military challenges?
Well, I think that there are some guys here in uniform who would answer that question better than I, because I'm out of business for some time. But we all know the word Gerasimov's doctrine. It's actually not his doctrine. It's not so much doctrine, but it's a way of seeing this security situation. And it started somewhere around 2010, when Russians came up with their idea of non-linear warfare. Which actually came back in their experience from the Second World War, where they were taking what they were calling aktivní мероприятия, or active measures. And the scope of these measures, including obviously long used tools like espionage, psychological warfare, but new technologies, especially internet, brought also new possibilities. So they came up with the toolbox of new active measures, because they don't see history being divided into states like we do. It's, I mean, peace, crisis, and war. They see human history as a continuous conflict, where only kind and intensity of tools differs from time to time, and that's why they apply all these measures and tools in a continuous way. So what we call a hybrid warfare, they don't use these terms, but they are doing it in practice. So we can see Russian influence in both the information arena, cyber, as well as kinetic activities like attacks on ammunition stores, like in Czech Republic, attacks on individuals, like a CEO of Rheinmetall, or killing their own people in a number of countries, arson attacks, and so on. So we'll probably see more of them because they are cheap, very effective. They are aimed at destroying trust of our own public towards the institutions. They are showing, I would say, lack of confidence in our own capabilities, and they are aimed at dissolving our resolve to act decisively against Russia. They are not used only by Russia. Increasingly, they are being used by China as well. And it's the way how it is, and we have to find the tools how to face it.
And that's it. We have to find the tools, but at this point, you don't have a short and clear prescription of how one faces it.
But I believe that we have not only individually, but also NATO developed a number of strategies how to face not only cyber attacks but also information campaigns, how to face hybrid attacks. We also have centers of excellence within the alliance. But the true value of the alliance is that we can share. Yep. And there is a great level of cooperation among intel services of the alliance. We share experience. For example, with cyber, from the beginning there was nothing, but very quickly we had the mechanism where actually it was similar to Article 5. So whenever one country was attacked by cyber attack, all others were coming to assistance. And there is a facility in NATO that has the capacity of mobile teams coming to different countries, and we share experience from every cyber attack. We evaluate them, share also not only knowledge about the structure and tools used by the attacker, but also how do we defend against such an effect.
So we've run out of time, but I'm going to end with a question that comes closer to home. You're in Houston, you're in Texas, you'll be going to NASA after this. You'll be going to a game between the Houston Astros and the Texas Rangers, and I think you'll be throwing out the first ball, if I'm not mistaken. So you can comment on either of those things, but what's really interesting to me is you told me the story of what the role of the diaspora here was actually in the creation of the Czechoslovakian state. Maybe we'll end with that.
Yeah, in fact, the immigration from that time Austro-Hungarian Empire started about around 1820 to 1850. And diaspora here counted up to 1 million descendants of these people, so it's quite strong. It's in fact, in Texas, is the biggest diaspora in the world, not only in the United States. And as you mentioned, when they arrived here, there was no Czechoslovakia. But as these people established themselves quite well, a number of them had an influence also at the national level. So when the effort of our leaders started for independent state during the Second World War, they were working hard with the diaspora in the United States to get support of United States for independence of Czechoslovakia. And they were working hard on it through from 1914 to 1918. And in 1918, when that time our first president, Tomáš Garrigue Masaryk, who actually was here in the United States, declared the independence, it was also because of great support of our compatriots here.
Well, this is just a wonderful story. I like ending there. I'm part of the German diaspora. My parents were both German immigrants. I think this is what makes this wonderful fabric of America so rich. I want to thank everybody online who's tuned in. I want to thank this terrific capacity audience here in Houston. I want to particularly thank again the Bay Area Houston Economic Partnership and Yagello 2000 for partnering with us on this. And Mr. President, thank you so much for your leadership.
Thank you very much. Thank you.